everyone, Chelsea here again with our Grief Healing Tele-Summit. Top experts share their best holistic healing methods to transform grief into healing and living again. Our speaker for today is Dorothy Fitzer. Dorothy is the owner of the Embodied Soul Center, which actually is in San Francisco. She is a psychotherapist and shaman, and she has a lot of experience in body-centered work, including Qigong, Taoist breathing, Tai Chi, Feldenkrais method, and I could go on and on. Very experienced. But really, the bottom line is for Dorothy, she helps people heal from their core and move forward to live an authentic life of joy and love. And she's a very talented practitioner. I've had the experience of using her for a shamanic healing as well as helping me with chakras, all related to grief healing. So it was awesome. So welcome, Dorothy.
Thank you, Chelsea. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you because I know you have a lot of valuable information for us on how to help people with unfinished business that they might have with their person who passed away, and lots of great tips that we can use every day to help with our healing. So welcome, Dorothy, to the call.
Hi, Chelsea.
Pleasure to have you.
I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, Dorothy, tell us how you got involved in your work or what you do at the Embodied Soul Center and how that helps people heal.
Well, I'll start with the first part of the question, which was how I got into it, which I think is a good explanation because a lot of people don't quite understand why I do so many things. When I was a teenager and young adult, I was a professional dancer, and I got involved in a lot of body-centered stuff. And at the time, it was to handle injuries and improve dance technique. And it was pretty selfish in that level. But the more I got into the body-centered stuff, the more I started having repressed memory regarding a terrible car accident I had been in at a young age. And by the time I was in my mid-20s, I was reliving it about every other day. And I had gotten an undergraduate degree in psychology, but I had been kind of turned off by mainstream academia at the time and had been planning on just pursuing the body-centered stuff. But when I started doing all that, I realized, wow, you really can't separate the body and the mind when all this repressed material was coming up. And my Alexander Technique teacher at the time was getting very worried and suggested, I think you should call this man, and it was a shaman. And this was so outside of my Episcopal upbringing. It was very unusual, but my intuition said call him. And I did he did a soul retrieval for me, and instantly I never relived that experience again, and a lot of other stuff processed as well. And that was a major transformative moment of my life, and where I really got the connection of the body, mind, and soul, or spirit. And from then on, I realized they're always going to be one thing for me, and I want to educate myself as much as possible on each front. And then a little also within that, a little accident happened where I happened to be chatting with the shaman, and I told him some things that had been coming up in my imagination, and his response was, oh, and then a little four-letter expletive. He said, you're journeying. And we talked about it for a while, and apparently I had been shamanically journeying all my life, but I was not aware of it. And so I started doing some informal training with him, and then eventually in my early 30s, I did more of a formal sort of initiation. And so that's how I got there. And at the Embodied Soul Center, that I created as I felt like I needed like a container or a birthing place to start offering more of my trainings. It's as you can imagine, it's difficult to describe everything I do, but I wanted a container where the trainings I did, it just made sense to bring everything together, that healing doesn't just happen on one platform, so to speak, that we have all these aspects of self, and our issues can emerge on every aspect of self, whether the same issue can emerge on the physical plane in one way, on the psychological plane another way, on sort of the mental belief system plane in another way, and, psychic, karmic, whatever. And when I work with my clients, what I do is I tune into which level is getting most impacted at that time, or what's the key level to address. So for me, I don't like the boundaries of, say, only doing, say, talk therapy, or only doing, say, a shamanic thing, because perhaps that day I need to address, okay, what's going on the behavioral level that's keeping this in place, or what's going on the physical level. So given all my knowledge base, I like the flexibility of kind of moving with the client and what they need at that time.
For the shamanic process, really tell us how that can help someone who is grieving. I know it could help with unfinished business, or if there's a dysfunctional relationship, whether resentment, unsaid things. Yeah, so really tell us how that helps, because it's really an amazing process.
Well, thanks for asking, Chelsea. Yeah, definitely. Most of us have experienced, when we lose someone very close to us, a sense of something being undone. I can think back to, my own loved ones who I've lost, and a lot of regret that I didn't say certain things, didn't ask certain things, didn't resolve certain parts of the relationship. And, in therapeutic terms, we use the word dysfunctional. It means just, healthy, a way of relating that doesn't work. And, being in my business, I haven't met a totally functional family yet, so there's going to be stuff like that. And, so one of the first things we can do is address anything that feels undone, because, one, it can create difficulty letting go, like, oh, I didn't say this, or oh, I didn't do this. It can create guilt if the person that is, living feels they still have unresolved anger. There can be this pull of, like, I have to resolve this anger, but I can't be angry at them because they've died. And so there's this tug of war inside, like, how can I possibly feel this for this person I loved, and they're gone? And it can really, the shamanic work can really hold the space of, one, it's being okay to have all those feelings, as well as provide a very alive opportunity to resolve them, because in this session I can help you connect with that deceased person. And this, of course, brings up a certain belief system. Some people believe there's life after death and others don't. And I certainly do not want to, sort of push someone to believe something versus another. I embrace all religion, all beliefs. All I can do is talk from my own experience, is that from my experience, yeah, there's still life after death. I talk to people not in bodies all the time. That's a large part of my day. So for me, it is a truth from my experience. And so, in working with me, we can connect with that deceased person, and it's a kind of communication. And I had this really beautiful experience years ago. I was doing a shamanic journey for this one fellow, and it ended up connecting with his mom. And one of the things in the journey we were working on for him was this really dysfunctional pattern he had of being in the world, of sort of defeating himself, defeating his own process, really not letting himself succeed, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And his mother, who had passed, came to me during that journey, and she had so much sadness. And I remember the word she used, the phrase she used. She's like, "This is not the legacy I wanted to leave my son." And it still brings tears to my eyes now, because after she had crossed, she had realized, her natural soul essence, I can still see it, was like this joyful fairy, just very light, very happy, very joyful. But because of her own life experiences, that got crushed down. So she spent her entire life, putting a cap on the bottle, so to speak. So she never lived, literally, maybe except in early childhood, never lived her authentic self. So our personal ego programming is the main program we pass on to our children, if that's the most prevalent thing. So her son got to experience very little of his authentic mother. What he experienced was this dysfunctional, we would say, programming, and it programmed him. And so it brought her so much sadness from the other side to go, oh my God, that is not what I wanted to give my son. Not just how I want to be remembered. It was, that's not the legacy I wanted to leave. But in life, she had not found the strength or the help to, get out of her own programming. So that's something in that session we worked on was, one, I worked with her, because both he and her gave me permission. I do not work on anyone without permission, to help her release what was still residual for that, even though she'd crossed, because yes, we can still cross with some of the, problematic patterns. So we helped her release that, and we helped him release that. So not only could he move forward without that problematic programming, but it also enabled him to connect more with her authentic soul level versus the ego level that wasn't her healthiest self anyway. So then he could have more of a loving, joyful connection with her based on this beautiful soul-to-soul level versus ego problem to ego problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and tell me, how, I don't know if you can describe it, but how did you get him actually to release that so our listeners kind of get an idea of
oh, wow. That,
hard to do.
That's really hard to explain because that's, we're coming upon,
like energetic type thing.
Yeah, it's an energetic, well, it's partially energetic, partially, okay. I'll work through the different levels. One of the things I've found to be one of the simplest things in the world, I learned this lesson as a therapist, and I one day I finally was like, I'm doing this as a therapist, why am I not doing this as a shaman? Some people just need to be so deeply heard, deeply understood, deeply accepted. Sometimes that's the most healing aspect. So not only do I bring that presence when I'm with my clients, but I really discovered many years ago that I'm working with someone out of the body. A lot of times when they're stuck, that's the first thing I offer them is, I'll connect with them on an energetic, psychic, heart to heart, whatever you want to call it, level. And, I'll just say, I'm not here to change you. I'm here to help you if you want. But I really listen to them because a lot of them have crossed with leftover pain, the things they feel undone about, things they feel unresolved about, and, things maybe in their lifetime they never felt heard about. And, kind of it's bringing tears to my eyes, but there are some times with some souls, I literally just sat with them for 20 or 30 minutes, and I did nothing but fully accept them, completely and utterly accept their feelings for what they were having, because, yes, beings still have feelings after they've crossed. And some of them, that was enough. Some of them, that someone for the first time said, yes, I really get you. Of course you feel that way. And then they had a huge shift. It's this complete, unconditional, loving, accepting presence that can often have the most healing aspect. So that's kind of level one. And, a fair percentage of beings will make a huge leap just after that. After that it can get, a bit more complicated. It might, sometimes I kind of joke that I'm just as much a therapist as someone that's died as if they're living. So there's certain ways of being. I'll communicate with the deceased about, different ego patterns they're still carrying, maybe kind of talk to them a bit about how it's not helpful so their consciousness can start letting go.
And then tell me, like, when you help the person who's passed over, how does that affect their loved one who is still here because of that shift in energy? Or
it helps immensely. Like the last example I gave, if there's a dysfunctional pattern, one passed on to the other. If the one that's crossed over releases it, it can help make it easier for the other one to release it, because there's kind of like how do I say this, an energetic web that connects it.
Sure.
So when, it's kind of like if you could think of like Carl Jung used to call it the collective unconscious. When one person in that pattern releases it, it can make it easier for the other ones too. It also, think of it this way, in the field of addiction, they talk about the enabler. And so when one person is sort of enabling the problematic pattern to happen, like say that one person is drinking or using drugs and the other person's always covering up for them or always taking care of them or whatever, it helps the pattern stay in place. Well, if there's sort of a problematic way, the person living and the person that's deceased had a way of engaging both with each other as well as, just in the world in general. If one of them stops doing it, it's sort of like seeing an energetic leash cut.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm no longer playing the game. I'm no longer doing that. I'm no longer keeping the system working. And so it makes it harder for the other one to keep doing the same. So they almost have to change at least somewhat. And it can free them. Because a lot of times a big thing I see is when someone's crossed over, especially the one that's still on Earth, but sometimes also the deceased as well, there's so much fear about losing the person.
Yeah.
That there's this grasping, oh my God, what am I going to do without them? I can't go on without them, or are they okay? And so the connection is based on fear.
Okay.
And so when we can start releasing, I'll say, any of the fear-based programming, that as that lets go, and sometimes I'm literally, like, you could say, cutting energetic cords.
Okay.
Or another thing, I work a lot with the chakras. Those are energy centers in the body that relate to sort of different aspects of life, is releasing those patterns in there, so that I'm realizing I'm going too complex at the moment.
No, that's very helpful for our listeners.
Is it helpful? Okay, yeah. So it's both the specific energetic cords as well as, like Chelsea, I'll use your example. When we worked, there was a money pattern your mom passed on to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so we worked with releasing the belief system about money.
Mm-hmm.
And so those kind of really heavy, dense ways of thinking and doing and feeling, they gum up the works from us having a loving connection with somebody.
Okay. And then
so when you,
I have a question.
Yeah.
Tell me, like, how you said you have to release the fear-based programming. Explain the difference between that and real, authentic mourning, real, authentic grieving. Because, of course, you're going to grieve because you love that person. So I think there's a between authentic grieving because you just miss their physical presence versus some of the other stuff that's not authentic. Can you explain that a little?
Yeah, of course grieving is normal, and don't get me wrong, I've with as much as I know, as much as I see on the other side, whenever I lose someone, whether it's a two-legged loved one or a four-legged loved one, I'm crying my eyes out for days or weeks, because we miss them, and that's okay. And that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing of honoring what we had with them. It's a beautiful thing of honoring what they gave us. And it is a loss, because even though, life goes on and love lives on, they're not here. We can't connect with them in the way we're used to or can relate to. Mm-hmm. And it needs to happen. Any loss needs to be grieved, and that's a wonderful, beautiful part of life. It's a beautiful part of being human. When I talk about the fear-based things, that's more, goodness, then we're going more into the psychological stuff of like, fear, will they be okay? Do they still exist after life? I won't, I can't survive without them. Whatever things are based on what I would say, what are really, if we really looked at them, untrue belief systems.
Okay. Yeah, because those are so common. You think, oh, is my loved one okay? You have those thoughts, and that they're so hard to work through, work with,
Yeah, it is. And the other thing is, when I'm talking about, all of this, I'm talking about it from a more objective place because, I'm doing this work for my clients. So when I'm working with their deceased loved ones, the majority of the time I never met the person. So I get most of the fun part. I get to connect with this being out of body, and a lot of times once the being's crossed over and they've released a lot of their unfinished business, a lot of times there's so much love and joy and humor in the deceased person that I get the fun stuff when I do that. But I will admit, if it's someone I'm mourning, you're not objective, you're subjective. It just brings up so much on every level. It and psychologically it brings up so much unfinished business, and we live in a culture that we get hidden from death. Even age and sickness are hidden from us. We do not have a healthy relationship with death. And so a lot of times when we're grieving a loved one, it just brings up all this, these problematic issues our culture has with the dying and death process. And it can be really complicated. And there can be a lot of fears, a lot of fears about what happens.
Mm-hmm. And then back to the shaman aspect of it, like when explain how someone actually retrieves part of their soul. That is just so mystical to me. And you can I guess mystical.
Yeah, when I explain it to people, as a therapist, I would say they're parts we dissociate from, and the pop culture way of saying dissociate is checking out, where you sort of really, where you really split off from a part of yourself. And so when a shaman sees it, it's an aspect of yourself that you cut off from, because in that moment, whether the time is too traumatic or problematic or whatever, you don't want to feel something at that time. You do not want to be there for that pain. And I know for myself, the first major loss I suffered was my grandfather when I just turned 12 years old, and that was immensely challenging for me. And I know I had a big soul piece split off at that time, because I remember very specifically, even before he died, I knew he was, coming close. I did not want to be here. I did not want to admit he was leaving. I did not want to be there at all for that. And
then, later, how do you get that piece back? You for example, you did the same exercise with me when I lost my mom when I was 28, and you lost your grandfather when you were 12. How do you get that piece back?
Yeah, that it's difficult to explain. I kind of go, a lot of shamans will say I'll go into a shamanic trance. I do it so much I don't need to go into a specific state anymore. But I do. You can say I connect with the larger energy field, and basically I set the intention that anything you've cut off from now comes back, and generally right into my consciousness will flash certain images, the person at a certain age, images of what happened at the time, whether it's literal or whether it's symbolic. And, it's all, I don't know how to explain it, it's all just very intuitive of really feeling what you're not connected to right now. And I use the visual and felt sense imagery. Sometimes, other senses come through, whether it's auditory or smell or whatever. And I work with healing whatever injured dynamic is going on, and then I help integrate it back into your body. Again, how I do that's very hard to explain because it's all, for me, on a very visual and felt sense level. It's very hard to explain how I can connect with it. And I know it's very easy to go into doubt about, well, how does she know what she's doing? And all I can say is that I've been doing it for about 20 years now, and it's all, about getting feedback or people getting results. And what happens is when I say I said this, this, and this, and people say, oh, my God, yeah. And then that's giving me the feedback I'm on the right track.
And then plus you tell the person, each day, right, to kind of invite that part of their soul back once you identify the part that got lost.
Yeah, well, it's, you always want, whenever a practitioner is doing energy work on someone, no matter how great the energy worker is, the person has behavioral habits that unfortunately can sometimes invite the pattern back. It's the same thing like if you get really deep tissue work like Rolfing or, some kind of structural work on the muscles, but you still have certain patterns of using your body that if you don't change those habits, you'll bring back the same, physical pain.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same way on this. So you have to give the person some kind of assignment to change their behavior.
Okay.
And so the soul piece left for a reason because it was too painful to be there at the time. So there's still some belief system that it's still too painful to be here. So once you've healed that soul piece and brought them back, a sense of trust and welcoming need to be made. A sense of things are different now need to be set. So the first thing you do is you welcome that soul piece back once a day, every day. So it's your way of assisting the integration process of making something that you pushed down into your unconscious for so long. You're deliberately allowing it, welcoming it back into your conscious experience. And the other aspects of asking what gift or lesson it's brought back with them, as well as what can you help to do it to stay. Again, the gift or lesson is part of the integration process where you're consciously bringing aspects of that previously split off part of self. You're deliberately, it's kind of like anchoring it, like what have you brought back with you, because then you'll have access to using it. And the more you work with the lesson it's bringing back, or the more you work with the skills it's bringing back, it helps it anchor in to stay. And, and then again, what can I help you to do to stay? That's a big one, because that's about setting a sense of safety. Because a lot of times there's things we do that, say we don't set our boundaries well, we don't say no when we need to, or things like that. That will typically make part of ourselves not feel safe to be there.
And what would be an example, like let's say someone, you lost your loved one at a certain age and you checked out, you disassociated, you lost part of your soul when that happened. What typically can you say to offer that part of you to come back? Can you give us an example of what you hear?
Yeah, a lot of times when I work with a really young soul piece, they need a lot of parenting. So a lot of times I will energetically, let's say, sit and cuddle that say if it's a 3 or a 4 or a 5-year-old, and because it really wants to feel a lot of love, a lot of safety, and because the really young ones, they're not so verbal, and they need well, even not at any age, a lot of times the biggest healing aspect is divine love. There could also be again, some dysfunctional belief systems or whatever, so I might sort of have to talk to the soul piece and explain what wasn't working before and what's working now. Explain to them.
What if the person's older, say it's like a wife who maybe lost her husband, or a person who lost a parent, and they're older? What do they usually need to help themselves feel better? As far as when you're asking the soul what the soul needs, like what are
Well, I'll give you an example, and I apologize if I'm not answering these questions well. It's what happens when I do these is so complicated.
I'm just curious.
Yeah. I'll give you an example of a friend of mine. She back in goodness, I just realized it was back on my birthday in December. Her father was killed suddenly in a car accident, just completely out of the blue. And for her, it was really difficult. As she said, her father was her hero, even though they had a very complicated, very sometimes strained relationship, because they're both very stubborn, strong personalities. She still thought the world of him. And what was particularly difficult for her was, it might have been just a few nights before he died, was they had one of the deepest connections they'd ever experienced. And she's in her early 50s, and he was in his mid-70s. And it was huge for her for them to be able to be that close. And so to have him suddenly be taken from her at that time was particularly difficult. And so she sent me an email that night and asked, can I check in on him and make sure he's crossed? So, and it was also hard for her because she had lost her husband to cancer a few years ago as well. So there's been a lot of loss. And so I did a journey for her dad to help him move on, and that brought her a lot of comfort to know he was okay. And then after that, it was helping her communicate. Like, she would ask me questions, and I would answer, just say that here's what he's saying. And for her, it felt very good because I never met her dad, so I had no reason to understand what he was referencing. So, she would know that it was coming from him and not me because, I had no idea what the family dynamics were or who was who. And again, like, as I said earlier, he said, he would say some funny things, like make, some wisecracks about his brothers or things like that, and that made her laugh. And I called her shortly before, you scheduled this interview, and I asked her, is it okay if I talk about this? And she said, oh, God, yes. If it wasn't for you, I'd be a basket case right now. She's like, you made me feel I could connect with him at any time. I just feel so confident he's okay. And the other thing was, unfortunately, when he passed at a very inopportune time because he was in the middle of a very messy divorce, and when he passed, the soon-to-be ex-wife suddenly came out of the rafters trying to contest the will, and so it's gotten very messy and very ugly, and so I was just able to give her some information from him to,
Sure.
find paperwork and documents, so that helped her bring some resolution. That one, it did make it easier for her to kind of clean up a mess, as well as help her feel resolved that she was, doing what he wanted her to do as far as sort of the follow-up with the will went. So there was some peace there as well.
Yeah, and I think it's hard for people listening to understand if they haven't had the experience with their connection to their loved one. And I know the first time I did, through the help of a medium, was probably about 10 years after my mother had passed away. So, I really had good 10 years of suffering, unfortunately. But then once a whole new world open that, wow, this connection really lives on. You do get a sense of peace and serenity, and you just have a whole different view. So that's why I'm hoping some of our listeners who aren't familiar with this concept of love lives on, that, either through a shamanic journey or other tools we'll talk about in other calls, will be helpful to them, because that is a great gift that you gave your client, is the peace and connection. And
it's tremendous.
Yeah. And then, Dorothy, also tell me, like, for a regular person listening, tell me, I know on your website you have like tell me what you have on your website if people are interested.
Oh, yeah, I have, I've alluded to so much, and I'm concerned I got into so much deep stuff I didn't explain very well, so I hope I didn't confuse anybody.
Okay.
I have a free recording on my website. It's a chakra recording. It's actually fairly extensive. It's about, I think, 50 minutes long. But I made it last year. I recorded it live with a group. And, again, for those of you who don't know, we have 7 major energy centers through the body, the 7 chakras. And they each relate to major issues in life as well as major developmental milestones in childhood, like issues of safety, issues of what we want, issues of empowerment and love and things like that, and speaking our truth, as well as, connecting with our divine wisdom. And what I really like about this recording is it was the first one I did from the perspective of the inner child. So it's not just an energetic healing. It guides the listener into connecting with each chakra from, sort of a perspective of their younger self and how they, develop certain issues, as well as really from a place of care. Because when we can really love and care for ourselves very tenderly, like we would a perfect loving parent, we actually really can heal those places where there may have been a bit of failure in our actual parenting, how we were raised. And so inner child work can be so lovely. And as I was talking about earlier about working with a living client and a deceased client and releasing the dysfunctional patterns so they can have a loving connection, this recording is specifically so you can become aware of the issues at each of those levels and release some of the fear-based programming, so that you can really bring your inner child into a point of love on each of those levels. So it's a really very, very lovely, as well as very, thorough recording for just 50 minutes. And if someone's wanting to do, address a specific loss of a specific loved one, you could listen to the recording with that person in mind, and then any unfinished business that might come up at each of these levels regarding that person, it'll kind of stir it up and help you release that and come to a bit more of a place of peace on each level with that person.
Do you recommend listening to the recording every day, or what's the best way to help someone?
Well, it might be a bit much every day. What I would say is it depends on how much you resonate with it. If you really resonate with it, of course you can listen to it as much as you want. But what I actually might suggest is maybe listen to it once a week or so, and then during the week, because it'll educate you on each of the chakras, and then during the week you can just keep a little journal of anything that comes up for you about any of those issues. And then the next time you listen to it, you can work with whatever comes up and let it go. But, I think bottom line, one of the things I would really recommend is, talk to your loved one. They hear you. They might, depending on the level of evolution of the person after they've passed, depend on how well they hear you. But I know one of your slogans, Chelsea, is love lives on, but consciousness lives on, and we can connect with it. And even if you feel you're not able to hear any answers, talk to your loved one about anything you feel unresolved about.
And
what's that?
And you mean like even talking out loud or writing it in a journal or even thinking the thoughts, correct?
Think it. I think for your own processing, it's good to either write or talk it out loud because it creates a kind of biofeedback loop that helps the processing. But, I think like I said towards the beginning of the call, we can have a lot of unresolved anger or, anger is particularly difficult because it's hard for us to address when we're dealing with grief. But there can be, and there's nothing wrong with that. And so it's okay to say, maybe you're angry at the person for dying.
Right.
Even if it doesn't have to be rational or not. It's okay. As long as you own the feelings as your own, just like you'd say to a child, like I have a 3-year-old, and, when you talk to a 3-year-old, you say, it's okay you have those feelings. Of course, some of them are kind of irrational, but, you just provide space to have those feelings. And if you're afraid of hurting the deceased loved one, you can do a nice thing where you can, either make a reel, sometimes with yarn or something, or just draw around you a circle, and you set the intention of, I need some space to have negative feelings, and none of these negative feelings are going to make it out of my little safe circle here. You can imagine you're in a ring of fire, and any negative feelings that you have that you're afraid of hurting someone with, they go through the fire first and get burned up and transmuted.
Oh.
But, yeah, I've done this with kids, and they love it. And, because, you can feel afraid that those bad feelings will hurt somebody. But if you set the intention that you're owning them as just your feelings, and they're in this safe circle, go ahead and have them. Write in the journal, say it out loud, scream it, sing it, paint it. But, say everything you need to say to that person that's undone. And you're just setting the intention of, I love you. I don't want anything I'm about to say to hurt you, but I need to have these feelings. You need to, just like waves in the ocean, feelings are just waves of energy. Allow those waves to move. Because the more you allow anything that's unfinished, the more you let that wave resolve itself. One, the happier you'll be, also the healthier you will be. And it's going to be so much easier to connect on a loving way with that person, with that being that's crossed, because there's none of this, excuse my French, shit between you. There's none of that unresolved stuff. You've said it all, you've done it all, there's nothing left except my soul and your soul, and I love you.
That's awesome, Dorothy. That is so helpful, because that's something someone can just do all by themselves. That's such a good tool that you use. And then if you still have them, you just keep releasing, correct? Every day or
yeah, and make up a ritual you like. Like one of my favorites was you get some paper, make it scratch paper, so you're just going to get rid of it, but you stream of consciousness write for 15, 20 straight minutes without any filter. Everything you feel, is negative or is positive, anything, even if it seems completely nonsensical. Doesn't matter. You're dumping it all out on the paper. You're letting it go. And then if you have a fireplace, burn it in the fireplace. If you don't, put it in the barbecue, whatever, obviously be safe. But I don't want to hear about the fire department ending up at your place. But, it's a way of one, especially if you've said anything negative, it's this sense of okay, with the paper, you're letting it go. But it's also about honoring the transient nature of emotions. Because we can be so afraid that emotions hurt or I'll always feel this way or whatever, when again, emotions, when allowed to move on their own, are just waves in the ocean. They move and then they're gone. But it's when we react to them out of fear or something feels unbearable, then they get stuck and they continue to torment us.
Mhm. That information that you gave us, Dorothy, is so helpful because you gave us like everyday little tools that we can use. And can you tell us the name of your website so people can download your chakra clearing recording meditation if they'd like to? Like, spell it out for us. People know how
it's my name, Dorothy Fitzer, DOROTHY, FITZ as in zebra, ER, dorothyfitzer.com. And again, I really love that recording. It's really, really sweet if you feel like your inner child really needs sort of like a loving cuddle.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if you want more information on the chakras, I write a weekly blog, and there's lots of good information and good exercises in the blog if your clients want to read that as well.
Yeah, I know. I follow your stuff as well, and it is quite helpful. So, yeah, Dorothy, this was awesome. I really appreciate all the information that you provide. And then also I thought it was interesting to tell people about the shamanic process because I'm sure tons of people don't know about this healing modality that you can use. And, of course, there's you have to find a shaman and because not everyone has that ability, but awesome. Thank you.
I had to come out of the shamanic closet years ago because whatever healing process you're doing, it can really, let's say, hasten it immensely.
Oh, right. And like I said, I've actually experienced the process with Dorothy, and I just felt so much better, and I didn't really know what happened. But, because it is more energetical, but it was awesome.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was awesome. And thank you, Dorothy Fitzer.
You're very welcome, Chelsea Hansen.
Yeah, and then just a reminder for our listeners, we will have some more calls coming up each day on different healing modalities, and each speaker specializes in a different thing to give you unique tools to help you. And again, thanks, Dorothy, and we'll let you go, and really appreciate your help.
Oh, thank you so much, Chelsea, and good luck to everybody.
Thanks again, Dorothy.